Thanks all of you who are here. Actually, the students of the monetary economic course should be here because this counts as a class, so they should be here, but everybody else, thank you for being here. So why were we here? This summer, the Financial Times had the idea of a competition for op-eds, open editorials on the future of Europe across a number of European universities, and they chose 6 universities. So there was Bocconi from Italy, Trinity College in Dublin, Sciences Po in Paris, the Athens School of Economics in Athens, the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin, and the University of Krakow in Poland. And in each university, a group of students, in our case, the students following the class Donato, Professor Masciandaro and I are teaching, were invited to write a piece on a subject of the future of Europe. The FT avoided to have a cross-country competition, so there is a winner in every school, but the winner in Bocconi, which is ENRICO ELLERO, who is sitting here, happened also to be the first in alphabetical order. So when the ranking was published in the FT, he came first. And everybody thought he was the first. Actually, it was just in alphabetical order, but he was the first. So tonight, the agreement with the FT was to have this competition that was decided upon by a group of journalists at the FT, and then to have a discussion at Bocconi on the winning essays, and that's why we are here tonight. And from here on, I would let Rachel Sanderson from the FT take over, and thank you.
Welcome to you all this evening. We're very excited at the FT to have this opportunity to have this debate this evening. And our panelists need no introduction, but I will go first. We have Presidente Monti, former Prime Minister of Italy, former EU Commissioner, who is going to be leading our debate in a moment after we've heard from the 2 winners who are present this evening. Of course, Professor Giavazzi, economics professor here at Bocconi, and also a visiting professor at MIT. I have Donato Masciandaro, who is the professor of monetary economics here at Bocconi, and my colleague here, James BLITZ, who has just arrived today, who is our Whitehall editor and also writes a Brexit briefing and is there hot on the pulse of the latest situation with Brexit, which I'm sure you will be eager to hear about later. If I can go first, though, we've gathered here today, as we've said, to hear from 2. The winning entry here from ENRICO ELLERO, which was titled Germany's Place at the Centre of the EU Cannot Hold. And we also have in the audience as well another winning entry, which was MAURO DURANTE, as well as, like Enrico, who was a 3rd-year student in economics and finance. Unfortunately, Lorenzo Polipo is not able to come here today, who was the 3rd winning. I will just give you a brief synopsis of Enrico's piece and of Mauro's piece, which they will go into. Enrico, as we said, has one of his sort of most powerful paragraphs here is that he argues that Germany lacks both hard and soft power, the cornerstones of true leadership. And therefore, as he said, its place in the centre of the EU cannot hold. Whereas Mauro has done a paper in an op-ed in which he's argued about populism and what should be done about it. It is, if I may say, a very positive paper on the position of the EU, which at one stage he discusses as, today we live in a beautiful though upgradable European community. And at the end, he posits as his argument that the EU must learn how to handle globalization in particular, as well as being an important player globally. It must intervene more actively in the redistribution of wealth in all of Europe as a means of dealing with the rise of populism. Enrico, if I can come to you first before we start the debate, and you give us some words about your thinking that went into your op-ed, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Masciandaro and Professor Giavazzi, and of course the Financial Times and Bocconi University for giving us such a great opportunity. I think it's essential to give voice to the young Europeans, because the students of today are the policymakers of tomorrow, and so their opinion matters a lot for me. And I've chosen to talk about Germany's weakness because this country is usually portrayed as sound, strong, and almost perfect. I must specify that I don't have any anti-German bias, but I think that Germany's strength is superficial because it just takes into account the economic dimension of the matter, but it underestimates the importance of other key factors such as defense policy, international commitment, and soft power. In my view, Germany has been unable to enhance these aspects of leadership. Maybe Germany doesn't want to lead, but anyway, it's impossible to build a leadership simply relying on economic primacy. Germany is not a corporation, and the international arena it's not sufficient to gain a larger market share to be decisive. And I think that strength is required, but trust as well. And the leader should be viewed as reliable, as a moral point of reference for everybody. To give an historical example, the United States, especially after the Second World War, became the leader of the free world. This happened because the United States had a technological advantage, a stronger economy, but it also embodied the founding values of Western liberal democracy, like free market, freedom of speech, and the rule of law. That was exactly the opposite of the Soviet model, but also the Soviet Union was a leader in its own way. Although it was a model of leadership founded on coercion and repression, nobody can deny that the Soviet Union had been a point of reference for many countries in the world for decades. I don't believe that the age of ideologies has fallen together with the Berlin Wall. The world is still divided into blocks, even though the Iron Curtain doesn't exist anymore. And this reflection raises the following questions. What does Germany symbolize in Europe today? Does it have a precise identity worthy of a leader? No, it's part of the Western Bloc. And in Europe, it's just a positive example for government finance, in my opinion. Everybody knows that Germany's indebtedness is far less critical than Italy's one or Greece's one. But that's not enough to justify a German supremacy over those states in the long term. In the short term, it works, and it's necessary. But a true leader is not simply the guardian of the common rules who reproaches others for not respecting the rules. He must do so as well as the American government does for what concerns the burden sharing in the Atlantic Alliance, for example. But it must not forget that trust is crucial. Is Germany trustworthy? In my opinion, not fully, unfortunately. Let me give you another example to explain my view. Let's look at Germany's attitude towards Russia. You know that there's an ongoing war in eastern Ukraine, and Russia, since the beginning of the clashes, has backed the rebel forces in Crimea and Donbass. Germany was very firm on this issue and supported the sanction against Russian and Eastern Ukrainian companies and individuals. That was an historic opportunity to emerge as the promoter of a European common agenda on foreign policy. But instead of taking a side and defend Europe against Russia's growing aggressiveness, Germany kept on working on Nord Stream 2, a strategic gas pipeline that will connect directly Russia with Germany through the Baltic Sea, doubling the existing lines of Nord Stream. And in my opinion, this is double game, and it will distance Germany from Poland, from Ukraine, and from the Baltic states. They are very scared of Russia, but although they don't expect protection from Germany, they want cooperation at least. And playing double game, for me, is the opposite of cooperation. We should remember that in the past, Mrs. Merkel expressed concern about over-reliance on Russian energy. So another pipeline is not exactly the best way to address the issue. And the first part of my essay is mainly focused on defense. Both left and right in Germany in the last 25 years have tried to reduce the military expenses, and in 2012 the Bundeswehr reached its lowest level ever. I'm perfectly aware that the odds that a country invades Germany are very slim, as the odds of a nuclear strike. But I think we would make a mistake if we ignore the power of deterrence. A country with a strong and well-equipped army and a nuclear arsenal has more credibility on the international stage. It's more reliable as a negotiating partner because it can ensure security and protection. Many people pretend not to understand that international balance is based on power relations. The strength of a country is the sum of many elements, such as economic power, population size, natural resources, and unfortunately, brute force sometimes. Given these assumptions, can we affirm that Germany is strong enough to lead in the proper meaning of the term? No, we simply can't. Does Germany want to lead? I don't know, but I don't think so.
Your time is over.
Okay, so
that was a good ending. That was a good ending. Thank you very much indeed. Does Germany want to lead? You don't think so? If I could actually even, 2 lines that you've picked up, and I shall, if I can turn first to Presidente Monti here. Germany, sound, strong, and almost perfect, or Germany not fully trustworthy, with the 2 titles. I mean, Professor Monti, your extensive experience, how do you see addressing, from your vision, the position of Germany as leader of Europe in this moment, particularly following the elections and what we're seeing with this, the changes, if one does say turmoil around Mrs. Merkel at this time?
Well, first of all, allow me to congratulate the Financial Times, because I think this has been an extraordinary idea to have this competition in the first place. And of course, it's not so strange that from London we get a view on the future of Europe which is casted in terms of a competition like the one created here. I think that is very telling. Also, of course, I'm proud that Bocconi has been selected for this, but next time it should be a cross-border competition, because it should be a single market and kept under the competitive winds. Though I'm fascinated by this op-ed on Germany, I must say, and I wish to congratulate Enrico ELLERO very warmly. And I think there are a number of acute observations concerning the blatant contradiction as regards energy that you pointed out very clearly. About the gist of the problem, Germany's leadership, I wonder whether we as Europeans should seek to have a leader which fulfills your last 2 lines in your op-ed. Namely, you say, if the European countries followed the German political direction, the entire EU could weaken. In a world where hard power, nuclear deterrence, soft power, and ideology still matter a lot, it would be foolish to be led by a country that doesn't excel in any of those fields. But is it admissible to have a dialogue or not?
Absolutely.
We don't have time.
Absolutely.
Would you, as a young European citizen, wish that the EU is guided by an entity which has all those features? And would you more relaxed and happy about it, or would you be slightly concerned? And would you then maybe seek relief in having a really collective community leadership more than the EU being led by a country which, more perfect than Germany, fulfills all these requirements? And then I have a couple of other remarks, but...
Well, I think that Europe has been already led by a leader like this, and just look at the other side of the ocean. The United States has been such a leader for 50 years, for more than 50 years, and I think that it should keep on leading Europe, because I think that the most important challenge for the European ruling class of tomorrow will be defending Western liberal democracy. So I think that the only country that can satisfies the requirements to lead is the United States. And I don't think that Europe needs a new leader, a new European leader. This is my point of view.
So Europe should be content with having a strong US leadership?
Yeah.
Then Europeans should vote to select the president of the US, I hope.
No. But most part of Europe is still part of the Atlantic Alliance.
Yes.
And I think that Atlantic Alliance has succeeded in defending the Western values for the whole Cold War, and should keep doing this.
Yes, that has been done also with a contribution, as you point out in your paper, by notably Western Germany, which has hosted
the Soviet Union.
Yes, but I believe that when you point out that after all Merkel and her defense minister Ursula von der Leyen, following Trump's admonitions, have raised to 2% their military spending, I personally believe that that was done also not just to please the US, but also because maybe with this president it is felt by Europeans that they should be a bit more master of their own destiny. Maybe not all of us share your total optimism about the optimality of undisputed US leadership.
Well, I think that the US didn't withdraw from Europe. The United States are still very committed in ensuring Europe's security. And I think that Donald Trump's statements were aimed at raising awareness in the European countries that the Atlantic Alliance requires a target of military spending. So his aim was he wanted Germany to pay more and to have a crucial role in Europe's security, because the United States will not ever be the only defender of democracy. That's what I think.
May I make another remark? I like very much your critical approach to some German shortcomings. Yet I believe that you maybe underrate a bit too much a strength of Germany, which is among European countries, the one which has more than anybody else a view of the order of institutions, ordo liberalismus, a view of the long term, and which has a philosophy, the social market economy, which to many people, maybe not to you, but to many people, does incorporate also inherent moral values, the ones that you would expect from the ideology of a leading country. For example, the respect for future generations implied by the fiscal rules, the orderly role for the markets, but under strong public power vigilance, and for the companies. Probably the excessive emphasis given to what you pointed out, namely government finance, which seems to be the only economic virtue of Germany, that has become so important simply because we all wanted to share a currency with Germany, which did not want at all to share its beloved Deutsche Mark with us. And so they had the upper hand because we implored them to share the currency, and they asked some conditions to be fulfilled. Very last note where I think I would find a synthesis between your view on Germany, which is more critical than my view on Germany, is that for Europe, the worst of the two worlds is what we have now, namely a Germany which is a reluctant hegemon, if I can quote The Economist rather than the Financial Times, right. I may. In 2013, a cover story of The Economist, some of you may recall, described Germany as the reluctant hegemon. So reluctant hegemon cannot really exercise the full leadership one may expect from it. And yet, although it's only a reluctant hegemon, many of the other countries behave towards Germany with the deference and the submission, which I saw many times and which I think is disgraceful, because they believe it is an actual hegemon. So this gives Germany by default more power than Germany is ready to embrace, and creates in the others at the same time a political subordination which goes with the ex post criticism of what Germany has done, but almost always with the silence or the approval of the others.
Yeah, I've never denied the economic primacy and the economic strength of Germany in Europe. As I said before, Germany's attitude towards Greece or Italy or Portugal in the short term is right, works, and it's necessary. But in the long term, I think that it's just one of the pillars on which Europe should be built. So what you said about Germany's economic strength is right. I fully agree with you. So my point was just about criticizing some weaknesses that are usually hidden, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I come then? Thank you very much for that. I thought actually if I can come to James BLITZ actually first, my colleague from the FT, just because of the this idea of the reluctant hegemon. I wonder whether, James, you can, from the position of London, to stir up the debate here, and then I will come. But from the position of London, is this very much the feeling that you're getting with regard to the Brexit debate? This sense that Germany, as whether a reluctant or a willing hegemon, is the major problem and a matter of major tension at the moment as we get to the point of negotiating a bill, a Brexit divorce bill?
Not so much, but I will answer it now. May I first of all say what a pleasure it is to be here, and also a tremendous turnout. I cannot imagine in the UK, in a British university, that this many people on a Monday night at a university would turn out to.
Now this is
have
Bocconi, eh?
This is Bocconi, I know. But this is top drawer. And can you imagine in Britain to turn out and listen to it in, say, Italian? That would be, I could not imagine that. And can I also congratulate you on having just come through a perfect recreation of the Oxford one-on-one tutorial, where your weekly essay has been slowly examined and carefully dissected. I enjoyed it. As far as the UK is concerned, look, on your specific question on Brexit, no, I don't think Germany is seen as the hegemon in any way as far as the Brexit talks are concerned. I think in this first phase, the 27 have really stuck together very, very firmly on the negotiations with the UK about the divorce, the issues of Northern Ireland, the money that the British have to pay to leave, and also the question of the acquired rights of EU citizens. And so there, I don't think there is a specifically German aspect. And the EU has stuck together, and as you know today, the British are still not moving forward to the next phase, which is, this is a much more demanding exercise for the British than they could have imagined. On the defence point, I think you're absolutely right to have raised this issue in this essay, and I think it's why it is a success. The problem of Europe and defence is not one that has arisen with Trump. It was already clear quite a few years ago that the US, even in the Obama period, and even before that with George W. Bush, was saying that the Europe had to take up more of the commitment on defence. Robert Gates, the former defence secretary, made an important speech on that. And that issue has become more important, I think, because my own country is in a state of withdrawal. It's not just over Brexit. I think you have to remember that the Iraq and Afghanistan experiences for the British have been very, very tough. And the British public has moved away from wanting an armed forces which are constantly active to a much more passive position. And the vote that we had in the House of Commons in 2013 not to back US military action against Syria, against Assad, was a defining moment even before we came to Brexit. My own view, and I think President Monti was leaning in that direction, was we're not looking for one country, this is my view, to dominate. European defence has to be a collective endeavour. It partly has to be a collective endeavour because I think, and I covered defence for quite a few years, it is an area where there is the most enormous and unnecessary duplication of effort among members of the European Union. Everybody wants to have their own kit and their own full spectrum, not all, but a lot want to have their full spectrum capability. And you need to have countries coming together to really say, how can we make sure that Europe actually has the best possible resources? And that process has begun under NATO auspices, but it needs to continue because in the end, collectively, Europe is actually spending a great deal on defense. It's just not spending it very well. And that, I think, is the direction in which things have to go. There is a separate issue, which is the one about not only spending money on defense, but actually wanting to deploy forces in active combat to basically get kinetic, bloodied in the field. The British have wanted to do that. The French have as well. This is still, I think, a problem for Germany and other countries. And so the question, I think, is can they move to a situation in which they are prepared to assert themselves more in that way? That is the question one has to ask.
Another, if I come, I don't know, Professor Giavazzi, where you have you'd like to come in at this stage in the debate, or I was interested to hear your opinion, both yours and Professor Masciandaro here, about the role of the ECB, which here in Italy, and something we've been writing an awful lot out of Italy, which is about the tensions over the regulation, particularly by the SSM, the Single Supervisory Mechanism, and Daniel Nui, of the Italian banking system. So I will come to that, and also the subject of the independence of the ECB. Professor Giavazzi, did you want to come in?
Our local expert here is Professor Masciandaro, so I defer to his wisdom.
No, just a first, thanks Francesco, just a first reaction, and I'm sure that Francesco, there will be a follow-up on this. A few minutes ago, Professor Monti spoke about the German idea about how the economic system works, and one of these pillars is the independence of the central bank. So I think that now, before the crisis was clear that this German type of central banks was the benchmark. And also the story was really simple. You have just one goal, which is monetary stability. You have one tool, which is interest rates, and then you have a monetary actor, which was an independent central bank. What independence means, I will say essentially three properties. First, you have to be focused on monetary stability. Secondly, you have to avoid any responsibility in terms of fiscal policies. And finally, last but not least, no responsibility in terms of banking powers. So given this structure that was the all normal, then the crisis came, and now we have a series of open questions on goals, tools, and then on rules. On goals, what we mean about monetary stability. There is a debate in the sense it's still a good idea to have a 2%, and then here there are hawks and doves. Hawks, then monetary policy should be more effective with a zero target, and doves said, no, it's better to have 4. Then there are people that said it's better to have a target in terms of price rather than in terms of inflation. On top, what about financial stability? Is financial stability one more tools that we have to include into the central banking sets? And finally, the people that dislike the German type of central bank, the independent central bank, they do a correlation. The correlation is this. We needed central bank independent when we had inflation problem. But today we haven't inflation problem, so we do not need anymore an independent central banking. There is a lot of debate on this. Let me say that is from a pedagogic point of view, is a fantastic example of fake news. It's really a false narratives, in the sense that we need an independent central bank in order to avoid that political short-sighted action can do, at the end of the day, worst outcome, not only in terms of inflation performances, but we can have worse performances in terms of fiscal outcome, in terms of banking outcome as well. It's true, this benchmark was in one respect was broken, given to the European Central Bank the power that you mentioned, the banking power. And this is a problem in the sense that in the same institution we have both monetary policy and banking stability. The European legislature tried to avoid this such as conflict of interest, doing a governance solution, two council in the same institution. And the intuition as we have to build up a Chinese walls. I hope that this could be China's walls. I'm wondering if we build up just a Maginot Line that was a really strong walls, but it seems to me not so effective in terms of the purposes. So it seems to me that on the one side there are false narratives, and I'm truly convinced that still we need an independent central bank. On the other side, we have some inconsistencies in the overall institutional framework now. So in my expectation, there will be a lot of debate in terms of how to build up the future in terms of what the central bank have to do, both in terms of goals and tools.
Thank you very much. Professor Gervasi, if I can come to you, we're going into Italian electoral season. We're in flow at the moment. I mean, I think we have to see this as the backdrop of this debate as well. I mean, following on and from Enrico Ellero's piece here, but also looking forward. I know you've written for the FT and spoken to the FT several times in the last couple of years, looking at, the youth vote, the impact on joblessness, but also the impact on, the development of the Italian economy. How do you see, though, the vision of Germany with Italy and tensions around Germany with Italy, and tensions specifically over the banking sector, which is playing very, very hard in the papers, as affecting the Italian debate going into the election?
So it is affecting the Italian debate. Will be one of the banking issue will be one of the big issues in the election. It will not affect, in my view, the very large number of people who will vote for the first time. I don't have a feeling, at least Donato and I teaching to students here, that what is happening in the banking system is a big issue that concerns young people. I think that, to link up with James, Brexit is something that shocks young people more. I mean, London is a tradition among all European destinations, is still the largest destination in terms of the flow of this very large number of young people who leave Italy and look for jobs, any jobs, from bartender to pubs to universities. And so the fact that the UK risks being cut out, or that it will be more difficult to move to the UK, I think this is something that worries, in my view, young people more than the banks in Germany. Then, of course, this is a country of old people, and a large fraction of people who vote will be concerned about the banking issue. But here I think it's a question of communication. Italy has spent to bail out its bank, has set aside to bail out its banks 1.2% of GDP, not all of which has been spent, 1.2. Germany has not set aside, has spent 14% of GDP. And the UK, I don't remember the number is, the ballpark is there. If we look at Sweden in 1995, when there was a big banking crisis, we were closer to 20% of GDP. So I don't want to say that those Italians who are probably tricked by their banks and who lost money in the banks don't have a good reason to complain. Many of them have been compensated. Part of this money has been set aside to compensate those who can prove that have been tricked by the bank. They've been sold products that they should not have been sold. So I don't want to say this has happened. But 1.2% of GDP, and Germany is 14% of GDP. And so it's not. And if you look at the capitalization of Italian banks compared to the capitalization of some German banks, of course, a lot depends whether on the asset side you put derivatives or not. So if you forget about derivatives, you put in a vehicle outside the bank, the capitalization of some German banks looks wonderful. If you realize that this bank is also has an equity commitment to the box where the derivatives are, then the capitalization looks a bit better. So in terms of capitalization, I think there again. So it's a question of, and this would be a difficult part in the election. And I don't think that for those of you who are Italians and who care about these things, the debate that is happening in Parliament, in a committee set up to analyze this, is helpful because it sort of focuses on specific episodes, which of course are relevant and should not be overlooked. In my view, they should be investigated by the judiciary, not by Parliament, because we have a judiciary for those issues. But I think there is a lack of explanation to the general public of this simple thing, 1.2 versus 14.
Okay. Okay. And the tension that we see, just coming on that point, I don't see it, but that there is debate in Europe at the moment about the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, which is very much the tension about this. I mean, what is your view? Because when I speak to the Italian banking lobby, they are still very vocally, very angry about, you know, that they're feeling that Germany wants more assurances, as it were, about the capital within the Italian scheme. And of course, this is being used by populists, which then, you know, segues into our next point. I don't know if you've got...
So the very thing, a common European deposit insurance is important principle. In practice, I don't think it is. So what does this protect? So a European deposit insurance protects bank depositors who have in excess of 100,000 euro in their bank account from expropriation in case of trouble. Not even in Cyprus, the government attacked depositors beyond 100,000. What you need, so I think if that thing is there, fine, but since we have limited political capital, I would not spend the political capital on a single deposit insurance, because I understand that if you bring the risk together, the number of things that correctly Germany asks for the others to do. But I think if the bank resolution procedure works well, and for example, to having a fund, a fiscal fund that backs the bank resolution that is important. But if a bank resolution procedure works well, we will never, I mean, never is a big word, but the probability that we get to the point of attacking above 100,000 is extremely low, not even in Cyprus. So I think this is a debate that risks spending a lot of political capital in something that is, in my view, of second-order importance. There are other issues that are important. For example, breaking what is known with this nice term as the doom loop between banks and their government. That is important, the excessive exposure of banks to bond issue. Right. That's a big issue. The deposit insurance itself, I think it's...
Okay. That's very interesting. I mean, we want to come to the floor, but I think I was going to come first onto the populism issue, if I may, because I think, as we say, going into the election, I mean, we were drawing on the comments, I will say again, that MAURO Durante made in his, and I wondered if, President Monti, you could, that the EU, in order to deal with populism, must learn how to handle globalization, and it must intervene more actively in the redistribution of wealth in all Europe. That what comes to mind, and I remember very clearly from covering your period as Prime Minister, is this idea of a wealth tax and a patrimoniale came to mind, and I just wondered what your view was responding, as it were, to this final paragraph. You know, as this was MAURO Durante's idea of how to deal with populism in Europe, and do you see that active redistribution of wealth via a wealth tax, via a patrimoniale, or something more similar than that, is necessary in Europe?
First of all, I would say that populism is discussed in this excellent paper as regards Europe, but unfortunately for the world, indeed, populism is a much broader phenomenon than just a European one. Secondly, I believe that one of the reasons why European integration has become distinctly unpopular in many countries is because it has proceeded without regard to the consequences of the integration of markets on the distribution of income and wealth. Then, if you wish, we discuss a wealth tax, but I think that we don't even have to go to scale up the topic to a wealth tax to consider that if you have a system of integrating markets without a corresponding degree of coordination of tax policies, then it is normal that there should be tax competition among member states of that integrating set of markets. Of course, tax competition may be liked because it exercises pressures on governments for them to be more disciplined. But the point is that whatever your taste, your subjective taste on tax competition in nature does not come neutral. It comes profoundly biased as regards the distribution, because it is natural that tax competition is exploited more by the more mobile tax bases, such as capital, such as the location of companies, than by the non-mobile tax bases and unskilled labor in particular, because we know for the high-skilled labor, Formula One pilots or tennis champions or highly paid and qualified professionals, they can find their best safe haven in tax terms, but for the unskilled worker who does not have a choice as to the place until he or she makes the dramatic decision of migrating, they remain exposed to the need of governments to compensate in some way by taxing more them the foregone tax revenue on the more mobile factors. So in a nutshell, this means that over the years we have seen on the whole a declining average rate of taxation on capital and an increasing rate of taxation on labor. So if the public opinion perceives that the integration of markets becomes antisocial, they're right, unfortunately. This is a principle that the UK government has not really never bought, although it was the first one to pay a price in terms of referendum results, because they have seen on that occasion how much an integration of markets unaccompanied by social policies has become unpopular. So I think it is important for the EU to do a bit more in terms of tax coordination in order to make market integration more sustainable and without strong backlashes. Then the wealth tax is one form of taxation. Some people may find it a bit strange that in a country where you have an immense private wealth, I'm describing Italy, as you know, an immense real and financial private wealth, a very, very considerable public sector debt, the mere talking of the possibility of having, like in most countries, a modest, regular, ordinary, undramatic, yearly wealth tax is considered unimaginable. Normally, may I add, it is the parties of the left that, as soon as they reach power, because they want people not really to consider them parties of the left, precipitate in eliminating any wealth tax that their predecessor governments may have established.
James, President Monti's brought up there about parties to the left, and we're talking about populism and coming to you. We had an article, it was today, didn't it, with Charles Bean, we had an article today about the possibility of a Corbyn government coming into power.
Dixon. Yeah.
Yes, today, wasn't it? As a result of, as it were, the part of the fallout of Brexit. How do you see that from your position, if we do hypothetically, of course, the proximity of the Labour government, who are a very strong hard left and arguably populist Labour Party at the moment under Jeremy Corbyn, how do you see that changing relations with the European Union?
Well, there's a number of points there. I think the first thing to say is, I think a lot of people think that in Britain we are in the process of what I call a triple whammy. In other words, number one, the referendum was lost, so we're leaving the EU. Number two, we've had a government which over the last 18 months has mismanaged the process of leaving very badly by pulling Article 50 too quickly. And a clear majority of the British public think that Theresa May is mismanaging the talks. And then the third thing is, having left the European Union and having seen what is almost certain to be a significant reduction in economic growth, which we're already going through. We are now the slowest growing economy in the G7. The public will then turn towards Corbyn and the politics of the hard left. That, I think, is a scenario which worries people a great deal. Now, it is not absolutely certain. Corbyn is really not doing that well, given how badly this government is doing. He is only, on the best opinion polls, a couple of points ahead of the Conservatives. And you would expect at this point that he would be doing a lot better. A lot of his policies are very popular. He wishes to abandon student fees completely, which is a very toxic issue in the UK. He wants to nationalise the railways, which most people, including myself, who travel on a train to work every morning, think is quite an attractive idea, although it's a very expensive idea. And he clearly wants to raise taxation on a wide range of people. But as Professor Monti has said, and I think it's a critical point, Britain is precisely an example of a country in which people who are very wealthy are escaping through evasion and avoidance, and the broad mass of the public is paying more in tax. And what Corbyn would do would simply be to reinforce that. And it is absolutely correct that that sense of differentiation between those who are very wealthy and those who feel really squeezed. And you have to remember in the UK that the figures on real income growth since the 2008 crisis are incredible. People's incomes in real terms have been progressively going down for the last 7 years, and on the Office of Budget Responsibility's latest data, they're going to continue going down. People will be poorer in the UK in 2025 in real terms than they were in around 2010. And that's profoundly worrying. One of the reasons why people are so pessimistic about Brexit is that Britain is a country which urgently needs, it has a major productivity problem. Productivity is our number one problem. Too many people, we have lots of people producing goods when fewer people can produce them in France or Germany. That is our problem. We have lots of people, we have very low unemployment in Britain, but a lot of people are earning not a lot of money for a lot of work during the day, and you see people feel under pressure. What we urgently need is to take the resources we have in terms of public finances and invest in technology, in education, and skills. That is what we need to do. Instead, we've decided as a country that we're not going to do that. We're going to have a trade revolution. We're going to completely change our approach to trade, leaving membership of the single market and attempting to recreate trading relationships with countries around the world with whom we do very little trade, in fact. And that is going to be a huge cost for us in terms of tax revenues for the exchequer. That is the real problem, because the numbers who are leaving the city, taxpayers, they will be leaving, the earnings for companies, and that is the problem for the British. Having seen this huge disequilibrium between the rich and the poor, and then deciding we would do something radical, revolutionary, we are actually going to worsen the problem. We are not going to improve it. That is the British problem in a nutshell.
My God.
Do you think it's too pessimistic?
I hope it is too pessimistic. But do you see that tragedy then converging to an application to join the European Union? by creating a new model, not variable geometry, but yo-yo membership?
Well,
Yo-yo membership,
Yo-yo
is that
membership.
new term? Yo-yo membership.
Of course it is a
Heard
new
it
term.
here first.
We are not here to use old terms, are we?
no, I think, well, there are two questions. One is, in the period between now and the time we leave, in March 2019, is there going to be a reconsideration by the general public? The public are seeing something happening in terms of the impact on their incomes, their livelihoods, and so on. But once we have left, a yo-yo, a returning, you would know better than me. I mean, it would be for the Europeans would have to decide whether they want us back. I mean, the one thing the EU will not want back is a Britain which is still divided over membership. That is surely
Yes,
right.
please.
Yes.
Do you have, I mean, Professor Giavazzi, do you have a response? I mean, is it, with regard to populism, is it, and also Professor Masciandaro, is it possible, do you feel, to deal with populism and the rise of populism in Italy? We see that the five-star movement level pegging with the centre-left. Are there steps that can be taken, let's say, from an economics point of view, from a monetary point of view, in order to ease the rise of populism? Or is it something that needs to be sort of, as it were, done through educating people as to you know, the need for experience in government at these times, for example?
Allow me to start from Germany as opposed to Italy. There have been, after the recent German election, interesting analysis of what has driven some Germans, a large number of Germans, to vote for extreme right-wing party like the AfD. And what is interesting in these studies that look at attitudes of people who have voted for the AfD is that it is mostly culture rather than economics. If you try to do econometrically, like our students do, a race between culture and economics as determinant of the vote for the AfD, culture wins big times. And it is culture related to essentially a reaction to the opening up of Germany to refugees, which then went towards the Chancellor and her August 28th speech in 2015, everybody is welcome. So this is important because there is one dimension of populism which is obviously due to income inequality, which is common to Europe, to US, to other parts of the world. But there is immigration has also been an important factor in the US, but in Europe is a particularly important factor. And this ties in with what James was saying about defense. I mean, if we look not the Europe in which Mario Monti and I, he's too young, but will live, but the Europe where our students will live, let's say in the next 50 years, the main problem, in my view, is how do we manage a situation where we have a few 100 million people on the northern shore of Africa, from the Middle East to Morocco, with income per capita that are a small fraction of income per capita, even in Southern Europe, wanted to come. And how do we deal? This will be the big issue. And if we are unable to deal with this, to find a solution, which is obviously not easy, then I think one of the big roots for populism, we can try to redistribute income at home, but we'll not be able to stop this, and therefore the cultural reaction to this. And so this, I think it ties in with what James was saying about defense, because it is obvious that no Southern European country, Greece or Italy or even Spain, can alone deal with these 100 million people who want to come. It has to be a European-wide policy. And maybe this is good news, because probably progress in a common defense policy would be, so we tried with monetary policy. It went, I think it went well, but some people don't think it went well. I think defense policy is an important thing. Now, defense policy is made, in my view, easier by the non-presence at the table of the UK, because the tension between France and the UK has always been the difficulty in moving ahead in defense policy in Europe. Now there is only France. Germany is not that interested, so we can move ahead. There can be a trade-off between France and Germany, bargain with France and Germany on defense and economic dimension, but only creating a common defense, which, don't take me wrong, I'm not saying that we have to send ships to stop the immigrants. We have to do something together. No single country can do it by its own, and this will be the biggest issue looking your lifetime, 50 years ahead.
Another aspect, and I think we've been looking at the paper recently, but in a sort of common European policy, is what about an industrial policy? Particularly, this has come from Macron, and I wanted to come to you with a question before I open to the floor, but this idea of European corporate champions. We've seen a number of deals. You want to make a comment on this?
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been with people today discussing, the ESSILOR-Luxottica merger. And I was going to, and that there are governance problems within those. There's Advertis, Atlantia. We saw STX, Fincantieri, etc. And even on an industrial level, it seems to be complicated. And I've been discussing this, and we've been doing a lot of reporting this at the FT, looking at these deals. However much, Macron may be very enthusiastic for these, however much the Italian government may be enthusiastic, or the German government, also culturally, as you said, it comes down to cultures within these companies. I don't know if Professor Giavazzi, you wanted to come back on this point.
You go into issues where difference of opinion now become sharper.
Oh, right.
And we have here our colleague, Professor Onida, who just wrote a very nice book published by the Bocconi University Press, taking a view that is almost orthogonal to what I'm going to say right now. Okay. So I just said why Brexit will be one dimension for which Brexit would be good, that is, it maybe make it easier to do progress on defense. One thing for which Brexit, the non-presence of the UK at the table, we preside on these issues. Not that we don't have at the table someone who argues for the market, for competition, for government staying away from industrial policy, staying away from national champions, and instead we have now the prominence of a country, France, where even a very liberal president like Macron thinks that you should have national champions, you have the right to stop mergers. And the Germans, I think deep down they're happy with this, right? I don't think they are. So here the non-presence of the UK is in my view, is a very big cost, because I don't think that with national champions we will increase productivity in Europe.
Okay, very interesting. Professor Masciandaro, would you like to come in on this aspect at all? Is there any...
I would like to remain my perimeters, and just to follow up, I'm wondering if there is any relationship between populism, monetary policy, and or central bank independence. Let me say that there are really few articles, few insights, and no papers on central banking and populism. No paper except one by Charles Goodall and Rosa Lastra, which is in a nutshell the conclusion. The conclusion is that populists tends to be short-termist players. So they dislike central bankers for two reasons. One reason is that central bankers, they have in their name banks. And so they dislike this, by definition. That's, it's one more case of very superficial narratives. But there is one more reason, more theoretical one. If you are a short-side player, you dislike institutions that try to have a long-term view. In other way, in order to have a monetary stability, let me come back to the story, why we need an independent bureaucracy that take care about monetary stability, in order to avoid political short-side biases. Now, if your politics is based on short-side perspective, It seems to be mechanical that you dislike central bank independent, that care about long-term horizon, that avoid short-term tactics and strategies. So my guess is that the more we will have populists in action or in charge for government, the more there will be tension for the central banker, particularly if the central banker are independent. In other way, I would say that could be some demand for reforms. Fortunately, it's not easy to change the independence of the European Central Bank because it's inside our treaty. In the US, it's more easy. It's just sufficient that you are a very powerful president that try to pressure the Senates, and you can change with an ordinary law the mandate of the Fed. For the ECB, I would say, fortunately, is more difficult. I guess that there will be pressure on the European Central Bank and on Mario Draghi. Hopefully,
it's certainly the case in the UK. I mean, in the UK, the Bank of England has come under a lot of pressure from Brexiters. They are the Bank of England Governor, Mark Carney, is described as the enemy of Brexit. It's a precursor to what could happen with these.
I think that's important that, you know, this pressure have to be no different from the coriandoli that Mario Draghi have to address some meetings ago during a conference press, if you recalled the situation during the press conference. So I hope that there will be no aggression on this point of view.
Can I ask a question of Professor Masciandaro? But do you think it is likely that a central banker be put under pressure when he and its bank provide such a powerful dose of never-ending monetary accommodation? Where are the reasons for pressure now, unlike 3 or 4 years ago?
There is a sort of winner curse, in the sense the more you are implemented conventional and unconventional monetary policy strategy, the more there could be new spillovers. Let me quote the distributional effect of monetary policy. A few minutes ago, there was a discussion on wealth. Before the crisis, there was no discussion about the relationship between monetary policy and distributional effect. For a simple reason. If your tool is just an interest rates, which are the losers and which are the winners? Lenders and borrowers, which are economic categories, not social categories. But the more you are involved in operation, in which you have change in the portfolio assets, the more there will be a debate on the distributional effect of monetary policy, the more there will be discussion on what the central bankers are doing, and they did already.
You are nicely introducing the category of the sophisticated populists who, for example, take side in favor of savers and consider that a permanently so low interest rate is not good for savers and maybe not even for the stability of insurance companies. But I think that by and large, current day populists in Italy, France, or elsewhere would only hope that the present monetary policy continues for eternity, whoever is the president of the ECB. Don't you think so?
Yes, but the more they realize that the central banker is a veto player, the more likely will be that they will understand that a veto player is against any kind of short-term policies, and there is a likely that they will be against independent central bank. This is my fear, to be sincere.
Okay. I think we'd like to open to the floor. Mauro, did you have something to, give us your view on the populism of? Absolutely. This is Mauro Durante, who was the...
Sorry,
Further.
good evening, and sorry, Professor, but you think that tax competition could be great for Italy, or we
So it could be
great,
great,
good,
good.
yeah, for Italy or not? Tax competition at Europe level.
I think there is already, and it has been
It's
there
good.
for a long time, tax competition at the European level. I think that the possibility of having tax competition favors mostly the countries which are able to have comparatively low tax rates domestically. Take Ireland. And they are those who cry highest when the possibility of more tax coordination is put on the table, because they would be happy to continue to attract investments by using, among other things, a low tax rate. Although many studies show that in the decisions of the geographical distribution of investments, companies give more weight to the education of the workforce or the quality of infrastructures. So Italy, as a comparatively high tax pressure country, is normally on the side of those who ask for more tax coordination in Europe, with the hope that the more tax coordination may also imply or may also specify a floor of the rate below which no country could go. I think we are far away from that stage yet in Europe, although if one believes, as I moderately do, in the value of more tax, not higher tax pressure, but of more tax coordination among member states, that is one small positive of Brexit, because I entirely agree with Francesco Giavazzi that the absence of the UK from the Commission, Council, Parliament tables will be sadly felt by those of us who believe in market and competition, because the loudest voice in that direction is no longer there. But of course the UK was also, along with Ireland and a few others, but more powerful, the loudest voice against tax competition. So from this point of view, maybe some things that would not have been possible before become possible.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the floor to? Yes, gentleman here. Typing away. It was Mac.
First
Yes.
of all, I would like to thank you for the interesting insights, which actually one of them inspired a question from me. So throughout the debate, we have heard about common challenges, taxation, equality, and European responses. So I would like to ask you, what would you think about a European effort for the introduction of a web tax?
Who's your question addressed to?
To all the panel. And who wishes to
Who would
respond
like
first?
to take that?
I don't know whether I would like a European web tax, but taking the European aspect of that, I think I would like more a European web tax than a set of disparate national web taxes. Do I like a web tax specifically? The ideal to me would be that as a whole, the tax regime for multinational companies in the European Union becomes much stronger in the sense of reducing the huge degrees of freedom that those companies making use of the European single market have of elusion and evasion. So then once that were done, for example, by eliminating the possibilities of evasion and elusion that are connected with transfer prices and all that, then maybe if something specific remains, and it is probably the case, to the web as an inherent possibility to avoid taxation, but only then I would be in favor of a web tax. I've been totally unclear, I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Just to add a methodological insights, it seems to me important, here we are a lot of students of our university, it's quite important to stress the importance to intertwine economic analysis with political economy analysis, in the sense that in taxation, let me take the example of offshore centers. It's a political economy story. You know, from 18, all the international community formally is against the offshore. But at the end of the story, the Briton said, it takes two to tango. If you have offshore centers, there is a demand for these offshore centers in the onshore centers. And usually the community use, you know, the blacklist approach. The idea is that carrots and sticks. If you look at the data, the blacklist approach is not carrots and sticks, it's carrot and carrots. If a country is in a blacklist, you have an increase in inflow. So, in order to go ahead in
like a AAA on the merit.
Absolutely, because you know it's a sort of pattern. Look, I am really dirty. Please come back. I'm really dirty because I am in the blacklist on one side. On the other side, I have no crime problem, I have no terrorist problem, I have no political stability problem. So if you have to hidden money between a banana republic and a very stable island, you go to the stable islands. So let me stress such a point. Take one more topic, cash. Why the war against cash is so difficult in such countries as Italy? Just for political economy reasons, not for economics. Trust me.
Any more questions? Oh, sorry.
Very silent.
Yes, gentleman here, second row. Microphone, thank you.
Thank you very much for all the great insights. And I would like to ask maybe President and Professor Monti, today we spoke about a more collaborative approach in the Europe and by the different countries, also on a military level, let's say, to protect Europe and to build a stronger connection between the states. But how can this be possible in this moment where there's a huge Eurosceptic movement across all Europe? And so how can countries decide that they can collaborate on a military level if they don't even collaborate in policies, in internal policies and decisions in the Eurozone? And then I think there's another huge player in the world that has not been mentioned a lot today, that is China. And I would like to know how is the power balance in the next years between US, Europe and China, and whether the Europe will be able to be united and to be powerful also in dealing with this new country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Obviously the second question is for James. And if you're sure that the first question is for me, I'll try to reply. That's a very interesting point. how can we expect EU member states to find a cooperation in more difficult areas to cooperate on if they quarrel on simpler areas? If they reflect, I think political leaders will consider that it is by increasing EU cooperation in these new areas that they will meet the demands of people. Because people are concerned. I mean, why do people turn to populist parties in many countries? Not so much for a matter of level of income, not so much for economic reasons, but because they fear, yes, there is the economic reason that they fear that their children will not have their same position, but it is above all because they feel insecure, they feel concerned. This concern has to do with an insufficient migration policy. I'm not saying migration limitation, but migration policy. It has to do with insufficient public order. It has to do with potential terrorism and all that. So these are exactly European public goods under the definition of a public good that you study in your classes. It is member states themselves that, you know, there has been a trend for many years now for member states to ask Brussels to devolve some areas and competences to them. This has been done in some areas, has not been done in other areas. But for the first time in the last couple of years, member states have turned to the EU asking it to do more in certain areas, not to do less. The certain areas are the ones which I mentioned, because even Germany, even France recognize that alone they cannot cope with these problems. So if you are a political leader in a country of a non-populist, let's suppose that most governments now in the EU are non-populists, which is an heroic assumption. But then how will you try to fight for the votes in order for them not to go to the populist party? Some governments believe that the more tax concessions, the more bonuses you hand out, the more you keep votes for them. I think that is profoundly wrong, because it is not so much for a matter of disposable income, but it is for a matter of concern, of fear, of terror. So it is precisely by enabling the EU to produce those public goods which will be felt as improving the quality of life for citizens that standard parties can hope to erode a bit the tide of the populist parties. At least I've come to this conviction. It may be totally wrong, but then paradoxically, what is more difficult to produce jointly, if it is clear that A, people really want that, B, that it cannot be produced separately, maybe there will be a progress.
Briefly, I think you're asking the question about what role can Europe play vis-à-vis China. One point would be security, the other point would be economic and trade policy. On security, my view is that Europe has a fairly limited role. The reason why we are talking about Europe having to do more collectively for defense is that the US is strategically turning its attention away from Europe towards China and the South China Sea. That is becoming more and more of a preoccupation for the US. I would be surprised if the EU wanted to take, should take its attention away from the critical security issues, which are one, the question of Russia-Ukraine, and two, the question of dealing with the Mediterranean backyard, particularly given the implications that has for migration into Europe, which is a major preoccupation. As far as trade is concerned, my observation as someone who's done some reporting on it over the years is that European Union member states need to be a little bit more collective in their approach to dealing with China. China has, over recent years, been very good at picking off one country against another when it comes to trade deals, Germany versus France versus the UK. And I sometimes think it would be better if in European foreign policy and trade policy, we took a more common approach, basically, especially if we want to raise issues of human rights. Because if we act as independent states, we are going to find ourselves being picked off one against the other.
Thank you very much. I'm being waved at the corner. I think can we take one more? No. One very last one. Can I take one? Because there was an urgent hand went up in this corner over here, and I don't want to say, no, the gentleman here.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. BLITZ, given his defense editor background, and for Mr. Monti, for Professor Monti, given his previous experience at top European political level. And it's about defense. In fact, 60 years ago, basically the proposal of a united European defense was blocked by France, and for 60 years was frozen. Now, also thanks to Brexit, do you think is the moment where this can be unfrozen and really progress? This is one question. And the second question, if this happens, do you think there could be a backlash from the people in Europe because they might fear that a European superstate, in fact, will emerge? Because, in fact, the EU is a sort of hybrid construction, something between intergovernmental cooperation and the federation. And the defense and foreign policy part is probably the biggest gap towards a sort of federal state. So what's your view on these two questions? Thanks.
I take the easy part for me. I believe that there are fears about a superstate, which will never be there. But those fears, in my view, are directed by citizens to other aspects. Excessive bureaucracy, excessive willingness to direct things from the center. I have the impression, and indeed the public opinion polls support this impression, if I'm not wrong, that if there is one aspect of European integration where Europeans would like to see more, not less, that is common defense, common security.
Yes, I would agree. In answer to your question, I mean, I think Professor Giavazzi touched on some of these points, to be fair to him. It's the British who blocked common defence policy for 60 years. The British have never wanted to see an operational headquarters run out of Europe by the EU, separate from NATO. Now that we are out, there is an opportunity for a more collective approach, as Professor Giavazzi has said. I would make one qualifying point. I hope the British aren't completely left out. We are one of the two big defence powers in the EU. There's a lot of talk in the UK about whether we might try and have some kind of observer status within, say, the General Affairs Council of the EU, which for a country like the UK is not great, but nonetheless would at least make sure we are part of the show, because I don't think we can be left out of the show. Europe has to be careful about one thing as it approaches common European defence, and that is not to duplicate or irritate what NATO is doing. This is a key point. there have been some good complementarities between what the EU does and what NATO does. NATO does hard kinetic intervention. Afghanistan, not a fantastic example, but nonetheless, it is an example, and so on and so forth. Kosovo, much better example. The EU has had a great success in anti-piracy off the Horn of Africa, where NATO didn't particularly want to go, and the EU is very good at softer interventions. We don't want to push the Americans absolutely out. I think the EU has to be nimble. It has to try and carry the UK as much as it can, and it mustn't put off the Americans. So I think it's, at the end of the day, the Americans still have, in technology, all the heavy lifting equipment. Look at Libya 2011. Not an operation we would have done now. But France and Britain on their own could do nothing without the US coming in the early stages of the operation. That will continue to be the case for a very considerable time. So they must perform nimbly.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to all our panellists. And I think, just as I wanted to come back, because I don't think there's one final point before, Enrico, before we go, is, did you see anyone else, if not Germany? Was there any other country you saw as being more fit to lead Europe? Was a Macronite France, for example?
No, as I said before, I don't think that Europe needs a new leader. And Macron's France is not ready to lead, so I think that...
That's not what he thinks.
No.
And so I don't see a new upcoming leader in Europe.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you to all. And I think James and I do a big vote for yo-yo membership with Brexit, so we will go forward with that hope in mind. Thank you very much indeed to everyone. Thank you, all the audience.
Bravo. Grazie.